Hello, in the last video for Unit 2, I'm going to discuss the last source of difficulty in symbolizing grammatical complexity and talk about how to deal with it. So remember, the notion of the main connective is a central notion in our method, so we want to be sure we understand it. So when we form a complex sentence, we take some sentences and add a logical symbol to the sentence or the initial sentence or sentences and get a new sentence. And the main connective of the new sentence is just that logical symbol that was added. That's the main connective. And that means that if you have a complex sentence and you want to find its main connective, if you remove the main connective, you're left with just the constituents that you put in. And the sentence's main connective determines what type of sentence it is. Is it a conditional or a negation in particular, since those are the two kinds of connectives we're currently working with. One piece of terminology I want to use that I'll be talking about some is scope. So we say that we have a sentence and there are two connectives. We say that one connective has scope over the other if the first connective occurs higher in the tree than the second. So for example, this connective, the conditional there, has scope over the other two connectives in the sentence because it first shows up in the tree higher than the point at which the other two first show up. So straightforward notion, scope. It's how wide, you can think of it as how much of the tree is beneath the connective. So that connective, the connective with the highest scope is over the whole tree, whereas the negation, for example, is just over one branch. Okay, so how do we symbolize? So we're going to use grammatical trees in English to help us, well, actually, that's not quite right. We're going to use grammatical trees that are partially English, partially logic. And as we proceed through the creation of the tree, we go from more English to more logic, ending with a purely logical sentence. And you've seen that happening. So how do we do this? Well, so we start with the sentence we're going to symbolize, and we find its main connective and the immediate constituents, just the parts that sentence was built up out of by adding the main connective to. We symbolize the main connective, and then we take the remaining constituents, which are the immediate constituents, the things that were added to the main connective, and we put those in text boxes in the trees. And then we don't copy down the main connective because that gets symbolized. And then we symbolize the constituents. We don't symbolize the entire constituents. We symbolize the main connective of each of the constituents and write down the constituents in the next boxes, and we repeat this process until we get down to the atomic sentences. Those get symbolized by sentence letters. The point of this is that you aren't trying to symbolize the entire sentence at once. You're only symbolizing one thing at a time, and that reduces the amount of things you have to figure out, and so it makes it easier. So the key thing you need to do is to be able to find the main connective. So how do you do that? Well, a big part of that is what I call the removal test. What's the removal test then? So suppose that, as I've been saying, if then or some variant of if then is added to two sentences, if then is the main connective of a sentence, how is it formed? You took two sentences and added if then. That means that if the if-then in question is the main connective, then if you take it away, you should be left with exactly two sentences, and you won't be left with more, and you won't be left with less. So, if you remove a sentence, a main connective from a sentence, and you're left with exactly two sentences, then that might be the main connective. You need to make sure you're getting your commas and breaks right, but that passes the removal test. If, on the other hand, you're left with more or less, then the connective was not the main connective. It doesn't pass the removal test. And if you think the connective is a negation, well, how do you form a sentence with a negation? You take one sentence and add the negation. So if you remove the negation and it is the main connective, you should be left with exactly one sentence. Again, no more, no less. So let's look at some examples of this in action. So we're going to look at a couple of problems. They're going to be somewhat more difficult, not impossible, but somewhat more difficult. And I should say that these will be more difficult than some of the symbolization problems you're going to be asked to do. I like to sort of start with easier problems, and through the course of a unit, get to problems that are more difficult than the problems that you'll be doing for homework. Okay, so here we have our sentence. If Ina is chosen as campaign manager, then Rudolph will be elected if he doesn't lose the Ukrainian vote. Okay, so we want to look for all the logical vocabulary and then figure out which of it is the main connective. So here we have an if, here we have a then, and here we have another if. And that's it, no negations. So it's going to be either this if is the main connective or this if then is the main connective. Both of them pass the removal test. If this is the main connective, then here's one sentence. That would be the antecedent. And there's another. So that could be the main connective. It passes the removal test. Now we want to consider, does this other if then, does that pass the removal test? And it does. Here we have one sentence. So we remove both the if and the then, and we're left with that. And we have another sentence. So which of these is the main connective? It's the one that makes the sentence break where the comma is, and the one that makes the sentence break where the comma is this if then, and that means that that if then is the main connective. So it's a conditional. The if hooks onto the antecedent, so the if will be Ina is chosen as campaign manager. That's an atomic R. Oops, not a conjunction. That's chapter 2. We want R. And the rest of this is the consequent. It goes there. So we have Rudolph will be elected if he doesn't lose the Ukrainian vote. Oh, I missed a piece of logical vocabulary. This nt is a not, and its logical vocabulary, it's a negation. But if we remember how negations attached to verbs work, they always have as small a scope as possible. In particular, if we have a sentence that's got a negation in it, like a not negation that's hooked to a verb, then we say take away the negation and you're left with an atomic sentence that has that verb, the one that the negation is attached to, as its main connective, and the negation attaches just to that atomic sentence. So we have the if and the not, and we know the not is attached just to a verb, which means that this if is the main connective. It's a conditional, so this if turns into that arrow. The if attaches to the antecedent, so he doesn't lose the Ukrainian vote goes there. We don't put Rudolph will be elected there. Even though it's on the left, Rudolph will be elected is the consequent. That's an atomic P. Why is it the consequent? Because if always attaches to the antecedent and the rest is the consequent. So he doesn't lose the Ukrainian vote. Well, that's a negation of he does lose the Ukrainian vote. So we're down to he does lose the Ukrainian vote, and that's atomic Q. And there we go. So okay, that's our first problem. So we'll look at two more. We're going to go to 118. Let's clear this workout. So we have a longer sentence. If Alfred will pass only on the condition that he concentrates, then logic is enjoyable, provided that the lectures are exciting. Okay, so we have a bunch of logical vocabulary. Let's move that. We're going to put a line break in. You can put a line break in by pressing Control-Enter. And I put it in at the comma because that's probably where the sentence is going to break. So we have this if, we have only on the condition that, we have the then, and we have provided that. So provided that could be the main connective, that would be the antecedent, and the rest of this, which is a sentence, would be the consequent. But that doesn't make the sentence break there, so that's probably not the main connective. We need to check the others. We have only on the condition that. Well, that's definitely not the main connective. It doesn't even pass the removal test. Let's look at why not. So if we thought that only on the condition that was the main connective, then we'd be left with this, if Alfred will pass, and this, he concentrates and logic is enjoyable, provided that the lectures are exciting. So this would be the consequent, because only on the condition that flags the consequent, and that would be the antecedent. Well, this is no good, right? Certainly this is incorrect. If Alfred will pass is not a sentence, but this needs to contain a sentence, and he concentrates, then logic is enjoyable, provided that the lectures are exciting, would also need to be a sentence, but it's not. So only on the condition that is not the main connective, and we know that because it doesn't pass the removal test. That leaves us with this if, which could attach with the then. So let's see, is this a sentence? Alfred will pass only on the condition that he concentrates, yes. And so is this long thing. So that's the main connective because if we remove the if and the then, we're left with two sentences. And the if then being the main connective causes the break to be where the comma is. So here's our antecedent, the if clause, and here's our consequent, the then clause. So let's look at the antecedent. Alfred will pass only on the condition that he concentrates. And remember, the if and the then are now turned into this arrow. So Alfred will pass only on the condition that he concentrates. Well, excuse me. We have only on the condition that is the only piece of logical vocabulary, and that introduces a conditional. We just need to figure out what's the antecedent and what's the consequent. Well, only on the condition that is a variant of only if, and only if flags the consequent. So he concentrates is the consequent. Alfred concentrates, that's symbolized as, let's see, as Q. Okay. And Alfred will pass is going to be an antecedent, and that will be symbolized as P. Now we go over here. Oh, I made a mistake. What did I do wrong? Let's see. We have the same sentence here and here, and that's not what we want. That means I made a mistake. Let's see. This is the consequent, so that should be there, and that should be there. So we need to make sure we do our copying and pasting right. Oh, wait, no, that didn't work. Let's try this again. Can I copy that? Okay. Control C. And let's see, is that going to paste over? There we go. That's much better. Okay, so logic is enjoyable provided that the lectures are exciting. Again, one piece of logical vocabulary, provided that. So that's a conditional. Provided that is just a variant of if. If flags the antecedent. So the lectures are exciting is the antecedent. That's an atomic X. And finally, we have logic is enjoyable goes in the consequent because that's all that it's left for it to do. And that's an R. Correct. Okay, so we'll look at just one more problem. And that will be it for this lecture. Oh good, we don't have, okay. So, it's not the case that if Alfred passes only if the lectures are exciting, then he passes if the lectures are exciting. So, again, we have a bunch of logical vocabulary. We have the it is not the case that, we have the if, we have the only if, we have the then, and we have the if. Okay, so the if is not going to be the main connective because while the lectures are exciting is a sentence, and this whole thing is probably, looks like a sentence, it's not making the break at the comma. And we're going to see there are better choices as well. The only if is definitely not the main connective because we would have, it's not the case that if Alfred passes and the lectures are exciting, then he passes if the lectures are exciting. Neither of those are sentences, so the only if doesn't pass the removal test. How about the if then? Well, the problem with the if then is that it doesn't pass the removal test either. We would be left with one sentence and another sentence, but then we'd also be left with the it is not the case that part. And so we'd have two sentences and something more left over. And that means that this is not the main connective. Excuse me, that means that the if then is not the main connective. But what about the it is not the case that? Well, this whole thing looks like a sentence. So indeed, yes, the it is not the case that definitely passes the removal test. And so that is our main connective. And we have a negation of the whole thing. Again, the it is not the case that has turned into this little squiggle, our negation sign. So now the if then can be the main connective because we have, there's one sentence, there's another sentence, and oh look, it breaks in the right place. So it's going to be another conditional. This is the if clause, and so it's the antecedent. And that is the then clause, and so it's the consequent. We have Alfred passes only if the lectures are exciting. That's a conditional. The only if is turning into a conditional. The only if flags the consequent. And so we'll put the consequent there. And that's an atomic X. Alfred passes goes wherever it can, which is the antecedent, and that becomes a P. Now we have he passes if the lectures are exciting. So here we have if, that's another conditional. If flags the antecedent, so here we have the lectures are exciting atomic. And we have he passes, goes in the remaining consequent position, and that turns into P. So let's see, did we do this right? Yes, we did. So, looks good. Those are some more difficult symbolizations. So for the remainder of this chapter, as far as symbolizations go, we're going to be working just to make sure we understand what the different variants of if are, what the different variants of not are, distinguishing between if and only if, making sure we can get the commas right in terms of how they work in trees, and then dealing with the grammatical complexity, and that is going to require breaking the English sentences into trees as we move down from here to there, to there, to there, to there, to there, and all the way down to our sentence letters, slowly translating pieces of logical vocabulary one by one. In the rest of chapter 1, we're going to be working on derivations as well as symbolizations. We're done with parsing. And derivations are like proofs. We're going to be showing that arguments are valid. Arguments in the logical language. And so we'll start that in Unit 3, and we'll see that that's a pretty involved activity. That's really going to be the focus of a lot of the Chapter 1 work. So, happy symbolizing, and I'll see you in Unit 3.